Right, good evening and Shalom Aleichem. You're either watching this live or you're watching it later on our YouTube channel. It'll be up on YouTube. For those who are here tonight, if you want to show it to other people, it'll be on our YouTube, the Five Leaves Bookshop YouTube channel in a few days. Tonight we're going on a bear hunt, Mir gehen auf a Bearjagd, the parallel language edition of Michael Rosen and Helen Oxenbury's wonderful book. We've got two speakers, two readers. We've got Michael Rosen and Helen Beer. The original book was published, in 1989. It has appeared in a number of parallel texts over the years, and this is the first time it's been published in Yiddish, obviously, and it's probably one of the first Yiddish children's books to be published in Britain for about 3 generations. Helen has translated it, but we've retained, of course, the original illustrations by Helen Oxenbury, and during the evening you'll see some of the illustrations and the Yiddish text. The format of the evening is that Michael and Helen will read the first 2/3 of the book in English and Yiddish, and then we'll have lots of time for questions and discussion. If you have anything to ask, please put it in the chat room and we'll try to sort that. Michael and Helen will stop reading just at the major moment of ursine suspension in the book. It's what we literary types call a cliffhanger, and we'll finish the reading at the end of the session. So you will have to stay to the end of the session, otherwise you simply won't know what happens. So to introduce the speakers, Michael Rosen is a children's writer and broadcaster. His recent books include a book on Zola, that one was not for children, and a children's book called The Missing, which was about his family members who went missing during World War II and his search to find out what happened to them. He's written an autobiography of the first 23 years of his life called So They Call You Pisher, and that features his Yiddish-speaking parents, Connie and Harold. And when we did a Nottingham reading of that book, we came up with the idea of doing this book in Yiddish. It was at that event. I'm not sure who suggested it, but we went into the meeting about the autobiography, not thinking about it, and we came out with a book planned in the time between the questions. We've also published Michael Rosen's Golem of Old Prague and a collection of stories by Harold, his father. Helen Beer is a Yiddish speaker, native Yiddish speaker from Melbourne, and I think there may be some people from Australia watching tonight, either tonight or later on YouTube, and some other parts of international Yiddish land. Helen has just retired from teaching Yiddish at University College London, but she also teaches internationally at Yiddish centres in Brussels and Paris, and is the course director of Otazoe, the London Yiddish summer school. I was trying to remember when I met her, and all I can remember was that she was reading poetry, Yiddish poetry, to a jazz background. I think it might have been Mordecai Gebertig. So if we get a bit stuck for things to do tonight, you can sing Yiddish jazz, Helen. She worked with us on a book called From Revolution to Repression, Soviet Yiddish Writing from 1917 to 1952. If you don't know of Five Leaves Bookshop, we're an independent bookshop in Nottingham. We've published a lot of Jewish books over the years, including the one and one only book in translation from Ladino into English. I have to say that the 5 people who speak Ladino in Britain were really, really pleased about that. We do lots of events. We have a bookshop. Have a look at our website. Have a look at the Jewish books on our website. So, to Yiddish Bearland. There will be a buying link. It's already appeared on the chat room. It'll appear again from time to time if you're so tempted. But otherwise, I hope you've wrapped up warm. You've plenty of sandwiches. You have a thermos, because we're going on a journey. We're going on a bear hunt. So I will disappear, and Michael will start us off.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can see me. Or if you can't see me, you can see we're going on a bear hunt, or maybe a mixture of both. I'm looking for Ross maybe to wave to say that all is well. Or maybe in the chat room I can see all is well. Let me just check. There we go. Somebody just say yes if you can see me. I don't want to start without people being happy that I'm starting. Someone write yes in the chat room and I will start. Anybody doing that for me? Just to cue me off. Yes, I think I can hear Helen. She seems fine. So I'm going to start. So here we go. You maybe know how it starts. It starts like this. We're going on a bear hunt. We're going to catch a big one. What a beautiful day. We're not scared.
Gehen wir auf Bärenjagd, a größen wollen wir haben, a so schöner Tag. Wir haben nicht kein Meure.
Uh-oh, grass. Long, wavy grass. We can't go over it. We can't go under it.
Groß, wochenlange Großen. Wir können nicht darüber, wir können nicht darunter.
Oh no, we've got to go through it.
Nein, 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 wir müssen da durchgehen.
Swishy, swashy, swishy, swashy, swishy, swashy.
Schurschig, schorschig, schurschig, schorschig, schurschig, schorschig.
We're going on a bear hunt. We're going to catch a big one. What a beautiful day. We're not scared.
Gehen wir auf Bärenjagd, a größen wollen wir haben. A so schöner Tag. Wir haben nicht kein Meure.
Uh-oh, a river. A deep, cold river. We can't go over it. We can't go under it.
A Teich, a tiefer, kalter Teich. Wir können nicht darüber, wir können nicht darunter.
Oh no, we've got to go through it.
Nein, 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 wir müssen da durchgehen.
Splash, splosh, splash, splosh, splash, splosh.
Pljuch, pljuschk, pljuch, pljuschk, pljuch, pljuschk.
We're going on a bear hunt. We're going to catch a big one. What a beautiful day. We're not scared.
Gehen wir auf Bärenjagd, a größten wollen wir haben. A so schöner Tag. Wir haben nicht kein Meure.
Uh-oh, mud. Thick, oozy mud. We can't go over it. We can't go under it.
Blotte, gedichte Blotte trifft. Wir kennen nicht darüber, wir kennen nicht darunter.
Oh no, we've got to go through it.
Nein, 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 wir müssen da durchgehen.
Squelch, squirch, squelch, squirch, squelch, squirch.
Chljaske, topče, chljaske, topče, chljaske, topče.
We're going on a bear hunt. We're going to catch a big one. What a beautiful day. We're not scared.
Gehen wir auf Bärenjagd, a größen wollen wir haben. A so schöner Tag. Wir haben nicht kein Meure.
Uh-oh, a forest. A big, dark forest. We can't go over it. We can't go under it.
A Wald, a dunkler, größer Wald. Wir können nicht darüber, wir können nicht darunter.
Oh no, we've got to go through it.
Nein, 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 wir müssen da durchgehen.
Stumble, trip, stumble, trip, stumble, trip.
Stomper, Sträuchel, Stomper, Sträuchel, Stomper, Sträuchel.
We're going on a bear hunt. We're going to catch a big one. What a beautiful day. We're not scared.
Gehen wir auf Bärenjagd, a größen will mir haben, a so schöner Tag. Wir haben nicht kein Meure.
Uh-oh, a snowstorm, a swirling, whirling snowstorm. We can't go over it. We can't go under it.
A Saveruche, a Wirbelsaveruche. Wir können nicht darüber, wir können nicht darunter.
Oh no, we've got to go through it.
Nein, 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 wir müssen da durchgehen.
Hoo, hoo, hoo.
Huva, huva, huva.
We're going on a bear hunt. We're going to catch a big one. What a beautiful day. We're not scared.
Gehen wir auf Bärenjagd. A größen will wir haben, a so schöner Tag. Wir haben nicht kein Meure.
Uh-oh, a cave, a narrow, gloomy cave. We can't go over it. We can't go under it.
A Hail, ein eng geschwungene Hail. Wir können nicht darüber, wir können nicht darunter.
We've got to go through it.
Nein, 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 wir müssen da durchgehen.
Tip-toe, tip-toe, tip-toe. What's that?
Auf Spitzfinger, Sipkes, Sipkes. Was ist das?
One shiny wet nose, two big furry ears, two big googly eyes. It's a bear!
A glanzig nasse Nuss, zwei große, puchige Augen, zwei ausgeglotzte Augen. Es ist a Bär.
And there's a bear. No, it's Ross. Sorry, my mistake.
We're on the edge of our seats here as to what's happening, but you'll have to be patient and we'll find out what happens with the bear and the seekers soon. So questions. Actually, I'm going to start with Helen. There will be some people who are listening tonight who are familiar with Yiddish. There will be some people to whom they came from Yiddish families, they may be Yiddish speakers, but there will be people who are very unfamiliar. So what is this Yiddish language? And tell us a little about it. It sounds a bit Germanic to me. Tell us more, Helen.
Okay, so
who speaks it?
It's a Jewish language that dates from around the 11th century, spoken by Ashkenazi Jews. Its origins are unclear. There are differing views as to how it began, exactly where Jews from where went to where. So there's a lack of clarity on that. You're right, it's a Germanic language. It's got a large Hebrew Aramaic component, but it's also got influences from Old French, from Old Italian, going back to Latin, and then very much influenced by where Jews went from place to place. So from Germanic lands to Eastern Europe, that's somewhat later, and then you get the influences of Slavic languages into Yiddish. The first written example of Yiddish is from the 13th century. And on the eve of the Second World War, it's presumed that there were about 11 to 13 million speakers. So Jews in Eastern Europe spoke much more Yiddish than, for example, mistakenly, some people think that spoke Hebrew. These days, it's obviously post-Holocaust and for a whole lot of other reasons that I won't go into, the numbers of Yiddish speakers are sharply diminished. Holocaust plays a big part in that. So now there are presumed to be between 1 and 2 million speakers. The majority of Yiddish speakers in modern times are from the ultra-Orthodox communities scattered in various places around the world. Anything else?
It's written in Hebrew script.
And it's written
People
in
will have
Hebrew
seen that.
script, yes, I neglected to say.
Are all Jewish languages written in Hebrew script?
I think the majority of them are. What's interesting with Yiddish is that where Yiddish was spoken in a certain period in Romania, there was a certain period where they used to write Yiddish, but in Latin characters. So it wasn't written in. But overall, predominantly in pre-war Eastern Europe, it was written in Hebrew script. Yeah.
Thank you. I want to ask you again, if you don't mind. Sharon Fleming wants to know if there were Yiddish idioms that enabled you to bring the story alive in Yiddish terms, rather than simply doing a literal translation of swishy, swashy, and so forth.
I think what was fascinating, I wouldn't say that there were any Yiddish idioms that would have applied in this particular text. But what was fascinating for me was, I thought, when I first looked at the different words that Michael used, and some of the ones which he also invented, I would say, like squirch and and then I thought, my first response was, oh dear, am I going to have to do some inventing as well? And then I started thinking and hunting and was totally delighted. I mean, Yiddish is an incredibly rich language. And then was delighted to find that I was spoiled for choice. Yeah, I didn't have to invent anything. So every word that I used actually exists in Yiddish.
Ariel Moss was just asking about that on the chat room as well. Michael, going back to the original of the book, because it's been around for almost 25 years, how did you do it? How did it work with Helen Oxbury? Did you work on the text and the illustrations together?
So first of all, we should remember that it's a story, as I've written it down, retold by Michael Rosen, because it pre-exists me as a kind of folk song, two main areas, American summer camps, and also various branches of the Scout movement. So Scouts, Brownies, Cubs go on lion hunts. So it seems to have evolved in the 50s and 60s. And then I picked it up and made it part of my act, part of my spiel in schools, particularly with little ones, and was performing it and was spotted by a publisher, Walker Books, famously, David Lloyd, and he said it would make a great book. And I said, you should write it down. And he said, you should write it down. I said, you should write it down. So we stood there doing this. And he said, I want you to write it down. So I went, okay, I'll write it down. So I went away, and I then realized quickly that my version of it, performance-wise, didn't go onto the page. For a start, it was too short. And then also the noises I make are noises. I go with the mud, and the grass goes. So I had to invent these words, just as Helen said, and it was too short. So I had to invent the snowstorm and the forest and the stumble trip and all that, and one or two other things at the end. And then I simply handed it over to Helen. The publishers did ask me whether I had any ideas as to how it could be illustrated, and I had some fanciful idea about carnival and sort of various beings in the carnival people in kings and queens and big heads, like the Nice carnival for Mardi Gras and things like that. And then one of them would be a bear, and then the bear would then take his head off, as it were, and there'd be a bloke inside, or a woman. So that was my idea, and I left it with them, and needless to say, they thought that was completely stupid, and which is fine. And Helen came up with this incredible sort of, well, in a way, it looks to me like a sort of English family epic. That's what it looks like, of people stuck on a camping holiday who've kind of taken the wrong route and have made up a story and then terrified themselves. That's how I kind of, but that is zero to do with me, nisht. So it's nothing at all to do with me. It's entirely invented by Helen and Walker Books. So that's how I usually work with illustrators. I write something and they make the book. So in the past, I've done that with, say, with Quentin Blake. I write the poems, hand them to Quentin and the publishers to make the book. My job is to, as it were, hand over some bricks for them to build a house with.
Thank you. But I should also say that this, I should have said at the introduction that this book, the dual language editions, are in association with Walker Books, and they've been very helpful enabling that to happen. Michael, your own Yiddish, back in 1965, together with some of the people who are here tonight, Julia Bard, David Rosenberg, we published a book called You Are, Aren't You, which was, I think that was your first collection of adult poems, although many of them were written for children. And you made them as Jewish as they should have been, because whereas the earlier versions for children, you had grandfather and grandmother, in the Yiddish version, in the more Jewish versions, you had Zeta and Bobbe, and you began to use more Yiddish in the text. And you're obviously drawing from a rich hinterland. Your parents were Yiddish speakers, you were not a Yiddish speaker, but you have actually a huge vocabulary. So tell us about Yiddish back in the home when you were a child.
So my father, more than my mother, used lots of Yiddish words and used them for the words for things around me. So I didn't know the word for a drying up cloth or a tea towel. The only word I had for that was the schmatter. That was pass me the schmatter. Why don't you do the drying up? Here's the schmatter, get on with it. For the collective, obviously, because they were left wing. And so there were words like I didn't have the word belly button. It was a pipik. And I didn't have a chicken leg, was never referred to as a chicken leg. It was always a pulka, and the chicken wings were the flegel, and I can sort of label things around my life in that way, because that's what my father in particular called them, my mother less so. And then there were phrases where there was Yiddish in them. So my mother had quite a phrase that she would often say. It was something like this. It went, it doesn't matter how good it is, you'll always find someone who can turn it to dreck. Now, so dreck means shit or poo. And she would just say that, and then you didn't have to ask her, what is dreck? You just sort of got it from the sense. My father hardly ever referred to money. He always called it mazuma. He did refer to people had a whole raft of names of types of people, schlump and schloch and knacker. So don't be a knacker. And he didn't bother to say what a knacker is. He just told you don't be a knacker. Don't kvetch, don't complain, but don't kvetch. Or you could also kvetch up your food. So it would take you to sort of get a sense of this. And then just occasionally he would sort of mutter strange imprecations under his breath. So he'd say, and Mum would say, don't say those things. And we'd say, what did he say? And she'd say to my dad very warningly, don't tell them. Don't tell them. So I say with some irony, we had to wait for my mother to die before my father could tell us what all these filthy expressions meant. There was one about tearing people apart, I think, about ausgerissen, ausgewähren or something. Anyway, there were these that he muttered, and I did write as many of them down as possible to reveal to people in his funeral, just to shock people. And there was a big row as to whether he said, may you get the cholera by saying chaliera zolste nimmen, or whether he said chapa chaliera. So there was a big debate at the funeral between me and a guy called Nat as to which of those two things he said. So, it's that gives you a little flavor of the Yiddish around me. My mum, I discovered, had been a Yiddish speaker before an English speaker, because when we went to Germany, the German Democratic Republic, of course, when I was about 10, we sat down at a cafe in Weimar where we were on the first day, and my mum turned to us and said, I understand everything they're saying. And we said, how do you mean? You can't. It's Harold, as we called him, my dad, very left-wing, couldn't call him dad, it was too bourgeois. So we said, Harold knows German because he was stationed in Berlin after the war in the American army. And Mum said, no, you don't realize I spoke Yiddish before I spoke English. And that was the first time when I was 11 that I realized that my mother had this whole secret place where she hadn't spoken English, you see, that she had been Yiddish in her head. And it's always been, and she was a very mysterious person, my mum. So that's a sort of added mystery about my mother, that she had this iceberg, as it were, this great land underneath her that she felt a bit reluctant to share with us, whereas my dad always wanted to. And I don't think he was as good a Yiddish speaker as she was.
I want to ask a question to both of you. There's a couple of things I'll pick up from people who are putting things in chat. I want to ask a question related to that. When going around the town in Nottingham in more busy times than this, I'll hear Polish, I'll hear Romani, I'll hear Urdu, I'll hear French, and people will be talking to their children in those languages. Whereas it often feels that the situation that Michael talked about a minute ago was the immigrant generation or the older generation spoke Yiddish, and they didn't pass it on to their children, which modern immigrants or people from the migrant generations are more comfortable about passing on their language to the children and using it publicly. And Helen said that there are many reasons why Yiddish became less popular, but it seems to me that there's so many people listening in here whose parents spoke Yiddish, their grandparents spoke Yiddish, but it didn't pass on. However, it did in Helen's family, and it did in Bundist Melbourne. So it's a kind of general comment about the way that people nowadays am I right? Am I wrong in this? And also, how did Melbourne be the exception?
I think what happened was that a lot of the post-war survivor generation, basically, I mean, there were already Yiddish speakers in Australia prior to the war, but the post-war ones, and apparently Australia took in something like the third largest number of Holocaust survivors. And so many of them, of course, arrived and they couldn't speak English because that's not an instant, you don't instantly sort of transfer from one language to the other. But what's very interesting is the people that I grew up amongst, and they were not a religious family on the one hand, and on the other hand, nor were they a Bundist, absolutely. Even though the Bundist movement was very important for Yiddish in Melbourne, but in my particular family, Yiddish was the language they had spoken, and that was their language, and that was their culture, and that was, and I grew up in a house full of, people discussing everything, till the cows came home, surrounded by books all the time, and it was just totally, totally natural. But what was also interesting in Australia is that the general atmosphere, there were also many children of immigrants from all over the world. So when I went, for instance, to primary school, to secondary school, you could hardly find a true blue Australian, whatever that might be, because everybody was a child of immigrants. And in each of those communities, it was just totally ordinary and accepted that everybody spoke whatever language they spoke, and they went to their Sunday schools and their culture clubs, and it was so natural. In contrast to that, because I've now lived much longer in Britain than I did in Australia, I'm always totally surprised by how it was in Britain. And it seems to me that the post-war generation was very much affected by the sort of notion of Britishness, or what you had to be, or how you had to speak, and the received pronunciation, or how you needed to behave in order to succeed, and all of those kinds of things. And I think that's my perception, that has had a profound effect on Yiddish speakers. So it was sort of a bit, not quite the thing to do, or you keep it under the table, or you pretend you speak English even if your English is not that good, or something. But the English experience seems to me very different from what I experienced growing up.
Michael, have you thoughts on this?
Yes. So the migrations in my family mostly occurred around the 1880s, 1890s. So they would have all come in speaking Yiddish. So by the time it got to my parents, I'm thinking this through, clearly in my mother's family, that her mother and father spoke Yiddish at home, and so did her relatives. Whereas in my father's family, I think in his own descriptions, it was his grandparents who was mostly speaking Yiddish. So the migrants who were speaking Yiddish. His own mum, I don't think really spoke Yiddish. I remember her, and I don't get the impression that she spoke Yiddish. His father would have spoken Yiddish because he was born in Poland, but my dad never met him because he was in America and did belong to a Yiddish-speaking community and was in the Bund and the Arbeiter Ring and so on. That's the kind of self-help organization, the Workers' Circle. So but my father did describe all these older people, the alter kakas, as he would call them, that he would sit in the library with and so on, and he could speak it. And in fact, in that book that he wrote called Are You Still Circumcised, his memoir, he says how his mates at school say, if you want to do a foreign language, do German, because it's so like Yiddish, it's dead easy. And my dad, thinking he was a knacker, clever clogs, instead did Latin because it was hard. And so, and he often said he regretted it because, in fact, he picked up German when he was in Germany. So it was very patchy in my father's life. And by the time it gets to me, 3, 4 generations, whatever, anyway, 3 generations later, it's this patchwork and not at all like Helen's rich experience of a full bilingualism. I've got this kind of Yinglish, as some people call it, that was pretty prevalent. I mean, as I've described it, and as I described it, I immediately thought of loads of other words that that words for your face, like ponim, that my dad seemed to use like nearly all the time at home. I think it sort of made him feel domestic. It made him feel, we have this word, the Heim, that usually means kind of Eastern Europe, but I think he felt Heimish if he did use them. He felt at home, he felt Heimish. Interestingly, little digression, when Freud came to find a word to describe the uncanny or the odd, the word that he came up with in Hochdeutsch, in German, was unheimlich. So his word is literally, very literally, unhomely, not like the home. So in German, and we translate this rather awkwardly as uncanny, but I understand the word Heimisch or Heimischer, particularly to describing pickles, as meaning of the home. And I think my dad felt Heimisch if he could speak these Yiddish words.
I want to pick up 2 or 3 things from the chat room. Firstly, I think they're largely in Helen's arena. Somebody's asked, Ariel Moss has asked if you've translated any other children's literature, but you do other translation work and you also do some court interpreting. I think people might be interested in your court interpreting. One of the children present, Devoira, is asking if that book Above My Finger, In Wald, in the forest, is there, which isn't a bear. There's not a bear there, but a rather attractive elephant. I don't know if Helen knows that book, but if you, Devoira says, how can you get it? The National Yiddish Book Centre will sell it to you in Amherst. It might be downloadable from them. I can't remember where I got my copy.
The National Yiddish Book Centre has got, besides having thousands of, something like 11,000 books from Yiddish literature digitized, which is pretty extraordinary. And that goes into a whole other area of how rich Yiddish literature is. But they've actually got a section on Yiddish children's literature. So if somebody wants to see if something is available at the Yiddish Book Centre, if you just sort of, check out Yiddish children's literature, it'll come up with loads and loads of different things. Michael, you want to say you've got a finger in the little
Yes, that's right. Just to say that I was just going on YouTube and looking up Yiddish and Yiddish children's stuff, and there's a woman in New York, she knows lots of little songs for youngsters. So you'd have to kind of use the search engine and find her, but she's sitting there singing to her grandchildren in New York, lots of lovely little Yiddish songs.
I mean, if you go into music, the Yiddish song repertoire is absolutely enormous, and within that repertoire, there's a huge amount of Yiddish songs. But going back to the original question about whether I've translated other children's literature from English and Yiddish, no, I haven't. But what's been very interesting in this whole experience is that suddenly I thought, because there is a huge wealth of children's literature in Yiddish that dates from, early part of the 20th century, and which really accelerated around the 1920s and 30s. And that coincided with the whole development in basically the sort of secular schools movement. And what's so interesting, and there was so much literature for children published in those years. So, for instance, I grew up with something like this whole variety of Kinderzeitungen. They would do these periodicals and these journals, particularly specifically for children. Um, in contemporary times, more people are taking an interest in the Yiddish children's literature, and there are more things being translated from Yiddish into English, and people are doing more academic work on children's literature. But I think, I mean, I haven't really, and also there are people in contemporary times that are also writing, they're writing things for children, but I don't think that they're writing things for very young children. And I think what this has really inspired me, just from all the, the richness of the Yiddish language, and just from translating, we're going on a bear hunt, and it's really made me think, maybe I have to try and write some sort of children's books using these onomatopoeic wonderful words, and the musicality of it all, which for small children is fabulous. Um, so yeah, so no, I haven't translated anything else. I mean, I do various translations recently. Most things are to do with music projects, film projects, theatre projects, all absolutely fascinating. And yes, I've also done simultaneous translation for quite serious court cases. I only take the serious ones. If it's, anything shady deals to do with money, not interested.
You haven't done one on the runaway Lutke man instead of the
No, I
runaway
don't know about
gingerbread man. No, I've just invented it. That's why.
No, I realized, but I was going to answer as if you hadn't invented it and as if it was true.
Yeah, right. Sorry.
No,
If Michael's invented it, by tomorrow morning, it'll be a book that he's written over.
The Lutke jumps out of the pan and runs down the road saying, "You can't cut me," there you see, I know one word already. You can't cut me. I'm the Lutke man. Yeah, I can see it. You can't cut me.
Okay, to be continued.
Yes.
To be continued. We're actually running out of time to continue things, but I'd asked Helen to mention about where people could find out more about Yiddish. You've talked about the National Yiddish Book Centre. Is there anything else you want to mention?
It's interesting that there's so much going on at the moment, and I think this is really accelerated in the COVID times. There's so much stuff going on online. So what can I say? There's so many where there would have been courses in person at different points in time, everything's transferring to online. So, people can check out. There's the YIVO is a good source of information. So they do summer courses which last for 6 weeks, and so they're doing loads of stuff online. And because of COVID, it's not only confined to the summertime. So there's all sorts of things. The Yiddish Daily Forward, which is basically now gone totally online, but it's a newspaper that started in New York in 1897. They don't do print things, but they also provide a lot of more cultural information rather than things about learning the language. There's something online also called Yiddish Sources, and that gets published periodically, but it alerts people to if they're various courses in different places. Gosh, what can I say? The London summer course this year, we're not still sure exactly how to do it, whether it's going to be any in-person thing or whether it's going to be all online. Last year's Brussels summer course is now turning into this year's spring course, which will last for a week. There are courses in Warsaw, in Paris, Israel. I think the only way to do is to sort of Google
Yiddishland is growing.
In London, there's also every month there's something called the Yiddish Open Mic, so that's also worth knowing about, and that attracts people in these times in particular. They used to meet in person, but that attracts people from all over the world these days, and varying levels of Yiddish. It's not a course; it's an open mic, so people present all kinds of cultural things. They sing, they recite poetry, they read stories. there's so much going on at the moment. You know, really, and there are not enough hours in the day. You couldn't fit it all in. It's too
Okay.
much.
We're going to have to finish the story soon, but I think it would be rude. Michael has I mean, everybody will know this. Michael was very seriously ill with COVID. He's written about it. He's been talked about it. The newspapers covered it as a major news story. And this summer, he has a book available from major independent bookshops, some of whom will have signed copies. I think it would be rude for, there's no particular Yiddish context to this, but would you like a word about that book? Tell us what it is, tell us when it comes out, describe it in a few sentences.
Well, actually, there is a Yiddish context. The word kvetch and drek do turn up in the book, you'll be pleased to know. I remind myself not to kvetch in the book, and also remember my mum saying even the good things you can turn to drek. So there is a Jewish context, as well as the fact that I discovered that one of the people in the opposite bed to mine, he was a son of a survivor from then Czechoslovakia. And we talked about the Jewish cemetery in Prague, which we had both visited. Yes, there is a Yiddish context for the book in a way. So yes, I got COVID. I was in intensive care for 48 days. I'm actually not alive. You think that I am. I'm in fact a ghost or a dibbuk. So there's a whole thing that people keep thinking that I am alive. And so in spite of all the efforts by the government to kill me, through their herd immunity, I have resurrected myself, or as somebody sent me a little postcard saying, "You are the resurrection of the year." So you can see the kind of world that I now live in with other people who got resurrected. One of our boys did it, why not? That's where it is. I've written a book about it, and it's got the nurses' letters that they wrote to me when I was in an induced coma. So they're in the book, and Emma's wonderful letters to the family telling me how I was doing, putting a very nice gloss on the fact that I was in fact just slipping over the edge. And so they're in the book as well. And so it charts me from getting ill through the coma in other people's eyes, to me, the state where I was in, which is I couldn't stand up or walk, to reflecting on what is all this stuff for anyway. So it goes from the kind of, oi, my legs hurt, to some sort of contemplation of what are we here for? I always remember that line from a Yiddish play that I was once in, where somebody said, "What is this life? You come in one end and you go out the other." That doesn't actually appear in the book. It should do. But anyway, there you go. I better stop talking. It's called Many Different Kinds of Love.
Good.
Don't fetch.
Helen will tell you there's another meaning for COVID as well. COVID is a Yiddish word of no relation to pandemics. What's COVID?
Yes, no. So COVID means honor. So if you say something, oh, you know, thank you for inviting me. Es ist a COVID. It's an honor to be invited. So I have recently been using that quite a lot because I've been wanting to say thank you. Yeah, I Shane them dank, es ist a COVID, and then I have to qualify that by saying, and I'm not talking about the virus. Yeah. So that's got a lot of potential for, you know.
Yes, I love it.
For
Maybe that could appear in Michael's Runaway Luck book,
yes,
that we're all collectively working on now.
Yeah, and it's also, yeah, it can also mean respect, as somebody's just flagged up in the chat. Yeah. So yeah.
We need to find out what happened to the bear.
Oh,
so
yes. I wish I knew.
Simon Griffiths from the bookshop has been doing the tech, and somehow he will magically bring the tech back. So thanks to him for doing this.
Thank you. So, and we should say goodbye to people, shouldn't we? Because I don't think we're going to say goodbye at the end.
We'll finish at the end of the book, and people will be they will want to run off and buy it, or they'll want to look up what latkes are if you don't know what latkes are. It's the Jewish festival of Purim tomorrow, so they may want to do some practicing. This thing's called a Gregor, by the way, or in Scotland it's called a Mac Gregor. And people will be using this tomorrow because it's a festival about football hooliganism and worse things. So
triangular cakes made of poppy seed.
Triangular cakes, Hamantaschen. We had one last night. What happened about the bear then? We were, c'est a bear.
And on we go. Quick, back through the cave. Tiptoe, tiptoe, tiptoe.
Schnell, zurück durch Heil, auf Spitzfinger, Zipkes, Zipkes.
Back through the snowstorm. Hoo, woo, hoo, woo.
Zurück durch Saveruche, huwa, huwa.
Back through the forest. Stumble, trip, stumble, trip, stumble, trip.
Zurück durch Wald, Stompersträuchel, Stompersträuchel, Stompersträuchel.
Back through the mud. Squelch, squirch, squelch, squirch.
Zurück durch Blotte, Chliaske, Topche, Chliaske, Topche.
Back through the river. Splash, splosh, splash, splosh, splash, splosh.
Zurück durch Teich, Pljuch, Pljuschk, Pljuch, Pljuschk, Pljuch, Pljuschk.
Back through the grass. Swishy, swashy, swishy, swashy.
Zurück durch Grosen, Schurschig, Schorschig, Schorschig, Schorschig.
Get to our front door. Open the door. Up the stairs. Tup, 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 tup.
Läuf schnell zu der Tür, öffne schnell die Tür und rauf auf die Treppe.
Oh no, we forgot to shut the door. Back downstairs.
Oi, Abbruch, nicht verschlossen die Tür. Zurück, herab die Treppe.
Shut the door. Boom. Back upstairs. Tup, 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 tup. Into the bedroom.
Vermach die Tür, rauf die Treppe, rein ins Schlafzimmer,
Into bed. Under the covers.
rein in Bett, unter der Perrenne.
We're not going on a bear hunt again.
Wir wollen mehr nicht gehen auf Bärenjagd. Kein Mal nicht.
Kein noch nicht.